There is a fundamental misunderstanding about empaths that has never been named clearly enough. Not in the self-help books, not in the therapy rooms, not in the quiet conversations people have at 2 in the morning when they are finally honest about how exhausted they are. The misunderstanding is not that empaths feel too much. Everyone says that, everyone nods at it like it explains something, but it does not explain the specific kind of damage that accumulates inside a person who has spent years, sometimes decades, being deeply, precisely, almost supernaturally attuned to the inner lives of the people around them. The misunderstanding goes deeper than that. It goes to the root of something that most empaths have spent their entire relational lives getting backwards. The misunderstanding is this: that your ability to understand other people protects you from being hurt by them. That because you can feel the shape of someone's wound before they speak it, because you can trace the exact origin of their cruelty back to a childhood room where something broke inside them, because you can hold the full complexity of a person, their contradictions, their defenses, their unprocessed grief, without flinching. Because of all of that, you believed, somewhere beneath the conscious level where beliefs actually live, that understanding was armor. That compassion was a form of safety. That if you could just see someone clearly enough, know them deeply enough, extend enough patience and enough grace, you would be protected. The relationship would work. The person would eventually rise to meet the version of them you could already see. They did not rise to meet it, and you are here, which means some part of you already knows why. Your understanding was never armor. In the wrong hands, in the hands of people who were not ready to be accountable for themselves, your compassion became the very thing that made you easy to wound. Not because you are weak, not because you are foolish or naive or lacking the self-awareness to see what was happening, but because you extended to others something extraordinarily rare, the experience of being fully seen, and some of them learned, consciously or not, that being fully seen by you meant being fully excused by you. And you kept excusing them, because you understood, because you always understood, because understanding was the thing you were best at, and you had not yet learned that understanding someone completely and allowing them to harm you are not the same thing, that you can hold the full truth of who a person is, and still decide, quietly, without drama, without guilt, that you will not be the place where their unhealed damage is deposited anymore. That distinction, that single, precise distinction, is what this is about. To understand how the trap is built, you have to go beneath behavior and into the body, into the actual physiological experience of being a highly sensitive person or an empath in a world that was not designed with your nervous system in mind. The human brain contains a class of neurons, mirror neurons, that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. They are the neurological basis for empathy. They are why you wince when you watch someone else get hurt, why you feel a pull in your chest when someone near you is grieving, why certain pieces of music seem to move through you rather than simply into you. For most people, this mirroring system operates as background processing, a low, steady hum of social attunement that helps them read a room, respond appropriately, build connection without losing themselves in the process. For empaths and highly sensitive people, this system does not operate in the background. It operates in the foreground, at full volume, all the time, with very little filter between incoming emotional data and the body's response to it. This is not a poetic description. This is what neuroscience actually shows about the HSP nervous system, a system that processes sensory and emotional information more deeply, more thoroughly, and more persistently than the average. When an empath encounters someone in pain, they do not simply register that pain intellectually and choose a compassionate response. They absorb the pain. Their nervous system produces something close to an echo of the other person's internal state, not identical, but resonant. Close enough that the line between what they feel and what the other person feels becomes genuinely difficult to locate. This is why empaths are exhausted by social interactions that other people describe as energizing. This is why they can walk into a room where two people had an argument an hour ago and feel the residue of it before a single word is spoken. This is why they need more recovery time, more silence, more solitude, not because they are antisocial, not because something is wrong with them, but because their nervous system has been processing at a higher volume than most people can imagine, and processing at that volume costs something real. But here is the part that matters most for understanding the trap. Because the empath absorbs emotional data so efficiently, because they are so fast at reading the subtext beneath someone's behavior, so skilled at identifying the wound beneath the anger, the fear beneath the withdrawal, the grief beneath the cruelty, they become extraordinarily good at building explanations. Not just understanding what someone is feeling, but understanding why they are the way they are. The childhood, the pattern, the protective mechanism that made sense once, even if it causes damage now. This capacity for deep contextual understanding is genuinely extraordinary. In spaces of care and healing, it is one of the most valuable things a human being can offer another. But it has a shadow that the empath rarely sees until they are standing in the middle of the damage it has enabled. The shadow is this: when you understand someone's wound well enough to explain their harmful behavior, you often explain it before they have to face it themselves. You do the interior work on their behalf. You process their history, identify their pattern, locate the origin of their dysfunction, and then you use that understanding not to hold them accountable, but to soften your own response to being hurt by them. You absorb the impact. You build a psychological buffer between their behavior and its consequences. And because that buffer exists, because your understanding is functioning as a shield for them rather than for yourself, they never quite arrive at the moment of friction that would have forced them to grow. You protected them from themselves, and in doing so, you slowly lost the ability to protect yourself from them. This is the mechanism. This is how a gift becomes a trap. Not through any failure on your part, not through weakness or poor judgment or an excess of feeling, but through the precise, painful irony of a strength that was never taught its own limits, a compassion that was given every tool for seeing others clearly, and almost none for seeing what that clarity was costing. Juk toi se keo dai moi fantem koang 150-202 giung guyen flo. Tong trin fan se jat 2000-2102. Toanbo script 3800-4002. Here is what no one prepares you for when you begin to heal. Not the healing itself. The books talk about that. But what happens to the people around you when you start to change? Because here is the thing about a person who has spent years being endlessly available, endlessly understanding, endlessly willing to absorb the emotional weight of everyone in their orbit. The people around them have organized their lives around that availability, not always consciously, not always maliciously, but structurally, functionally. They built their comfort on the assumption that you will always be there, always be soft, always understand before they even have to explain. And when that changes, when you begin, quietly and without announcement, to pull back, the system destabilizes, and destabilized systems produce friction. The friction does not always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like confusion performed loudly enough to feel like accusation. Sometimes it looks like a sudden reevaluation of your character, a narrative that emerges, seemingly from nowhere, in which you have become cold, difficult, changed in ways that are framed as losses rather than growth. Sometimes it looks like guilt, delivered not as a direct statement, but as an atmosphere, a heaviness in conversations, a series of small signals that communicate, without ever quite saying it. You are failing me by becoming someone I cannot predict. You've changed. You used to be so warm. I don't know what happened to you. You're being selfish. You're being distant. You're not who you used to be. If you are an empath who has begun to heal, who has started saying no without a paragraph of explanation, who has started letting silence stand where you would once have rushed to fill it with reassurance, you have heard some version of these words, perhaps from people you loved, perhaps from people you sacrificed years of yourself to support. And the particular sting of it is that it arrives precisely when you are doing the most important work of your life. You are learning to take yourself seriously. And the people who built their comfort on you not taking yourself seriously are the first to call it a flaw. What you have to understand is that the friction is not actually about you. It is not evidence that you have become unkind. It is not confirmation that the old version of you was better or more loving. It is a protest from people who had access to something they did not earn and who are now watching that access be quietly revoked. They are not angry because you have become less loving. They are angry because loving you used to cost them nothing, because you required so little in return, and now you are beginning to require something small, something basic, something any fair relationship would have included from the beginning, and that something feels to them like an imposition. Because it is an imposition on a dynamic that was never fair to begin with. There is something else happening beneath the anger, though, something quieter and more important to name. When an empath stops performing emotional availability, stops being the person who sees everyone, tends to everyone, holds space for everyone, regardless of cost, they become, without intending to, a mirror, a very clear, very uncomfortable mirror. Because what does it communicate when the most empathetic person in the room becomes selective? What does it mean when the one who always had infinite patience has quietly run out of it, not for the world, not for strangers, but specifically, precisely, for you? It means something has been seen, evaluated, and no longer worth the cost of continuing to excuse. For people who relied on the empath's understanding as a substitute for their own self-reflection, this is genuinely threatening. Your withdrawal carries information. It says, I have seen you clearly for a long time, and with full knowledge of all of that, I have made a decision about what I will continue to participate in. The people who are most upset by your boundaries are almost never the ones who were treating you well. The ones who were genuinely present and reciprocal, those people adjust. They feel the shift and they come closer, not with demands, but with curiosity. The ones who escalate, who guilt, who punish, who reframe your healing as betrayal, are showing you, with a clarity that requires no interpretation, what the relationship was actually built on. Not connection, consumption. Let them be angry. Their anger is not your instruction. There comes a moment when something inside the empath quietly stops apologizing for existing. It does not arrive as a lightning strike. It arrives the way a season changes, so gradually you cannot point to the exact day, only to the morning you wake up and realize the guilt you have been carrying for years is, somehow, slightly lighter than it was before. That the exhaustion has not disappeared, but has changed quality, shifted from the deadening weight of someone who cannot stop to the manageable tiredness of someone who is finally moving in the right direction. This is the awakening. Not enlightenment, just the quiet, unglamorous act of beginning to return to yourself. And the first thing you notice when you start to return is how far you had traveled from yourself without ever moving. You were present in every room, available for every conversation. You had mapped other people's inner worlds with a cartographer's precision, and you could not have told anyone, in that same period, what you actually needed. What kind of silence felt restful versus depleting. What you had genuinely wanted, not as a support system or an emotional resource, but simply as a person with your own hungers and your own limits and your own quietly persistent interior life. This is what chronic overfunctioning does. It does not erase the self dramatically, it erodes it. Slowly, through 10,000 small acts of prioritizing everyone else's comfort over your own truth, until the self becomes something you have to actively search for rather than simply inhabit. Out of that erosion, if you stay with the discomfort long enough to hear what it is actually saying, something clarifies. The recognition that a significant portion of the exhaustion you carry is not yours. That you have been absorbing what others needed to process for themselves. That somewhere along the way, in the absence of clear limits, you began carrying weight that was never assigned to you. Not through any formal agreement, but through the accumulated effect of 100 small moments in which you resolved what others needed to feel the full discomfort of, and in doing so, removed from them the friction that would have caused them to grow. You carried the growth for them, and called it love. This is not a condemnation. It came from a genuine place, from a real, unironic desire to ease suffering wherever it appeared. But intention does not change impact. And the impact, over time, was a relationship dynamic in which you were doing the interior work of two people and receiving the acknowledgement of neither. Seeing this clearly, really clearly, without the habitual softening that has always accompanied painful recognitions about people you love, is what makes the next step possible. The next step is boundaries. And before anything else, the word needs to be rescued from how it is usually used. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments or cold withdrawals or the emotional equivalent of slamming a door. They are simply an honest statement about what you are available for and what you are not, where your energy can go and return replenished, and where it goes and does not come back. That is all, and that is everything. Because what the empath discovers when they begin practicing this, even imperfectly, even with the guilt still present at first, is that boundaries do not reduce connection. They make real connection possible for the first time. When you are available to everyone for everything at any cost, your presence means very little. It is a given, not a gift. But when you become selective, when your presence becomes something you choose rather than something you cannot withhold, it acquires weight. Your yes means something. Because it is real, not the exhausted compliance of someone who does not know how to say no, but a genuine offering from a person who has something left to give. The silence, the quieter responses, the explanations withheld, the interactions declined without elaborate justification. That silence is not absence. It is discernment made visible. The capacity to distinguish between relationships that have difficulty because two real people are trying to see each other honestly, and relationships that have difficulty because one person has been absorbing the cost of the other's unwillingness to look at themselves. You are allowed to know the difference. You are allowed to act on what you know, without guilt, without the long, careful explanation that turns every boundary into a negotiation. Your clarity belongs to you, and so does your peace. So let this be the thing you carry forward, not a technique, not a new framework to replace the old one. Just the permission, finally, after however long it has taken to arrive here, to stop treating your own interior life as the least important variable in every equation you have ever tried to solve. The full truth of you is someone with extraordinary depth, with a perceptual capacity that most people will spend their entire lives not accessing. With the ability to sit inside another person's experience so completely that they feel, perhaps for the first time, genuinely witnessed. That capacity is real. It is not the problem. It has never been the problem. The full truth of you is also someone with edges, with limits, with things that drain and things that restore, and strong, specific, entirely legitimate knowledge of the difference. With a need for reciprocity that is not greed but basic relational nutrition. With a self that deserves to be the subject of their own life rather than the supporting architecture of everyone else's. Both of these things are true at the same time. And the real healing, not the performance of healing, not the version that involves saying the right words while the same dynamics quietly reconstitute themselves in new relationships. The real healing is the work of holding both truths simultaneously, of being someone who feels deeply and protects that depth, who gives generously and knows precisely where generosity ends and self-erasure begins, who loves without reservation and has learned that loving without reservation does not mean living without discernment. These are not contradictions. They are the full picture of who you are, and you are allowed to inhabit the full picture. The relationships that survive your awakening, the ones that do not require you to be less than whole in order to participate in them, those will feel different from anything you may have known before, not perfect. Not without the ordinary friction of two people trying to be honest with each other, but different in a way that matters deeply. They will feel like rest, even when they are challenging, because what they ask for is genuine presence, not performance, not management, not the exhausting work of being the only person in the room paying attention to everyone's emotional weather simultaneously. The right relationships metabolize, the wrong ones accumulate. You have spent long enough accumulating, for the ones who did not stay, for the relationships that could not survive your healing. Grieve if you need to. Grieving is not weakness. It is the honest acknowledgement that something mattered, even if it cost more than it gave. But do not build a story in which their leaving means something was wrong with you. It means something was wrong with the arrangement. An arrangement built on an imbalance so fundamental that balance, when it finally arrived, felt to them like deprivation. And an arrangement that cannot survive the presence of your wholeness was never, whatever else it was, a safe place for you to be. You are not too sensitive for this world. You are too honest for the parts of it that depend on people like you not knowing your own value. You are not broken by what you have absorbed. You are informed by it, educated into something more precise, more discerning, more quietly sovereign than you were before the education began. And that sovereignty, unhurried, undefended, requiring no one's permission to exist, is not the end of your compassion. It is the first time your compassion has ever had a stable place to live. Stop waiting for the moment when the person who hurt you finally understands what they cost you. That moment may never arrive. And even if it does, it will not give you back what you spent waiting for it. You do not need their understanding to put it down. You only need to decide that the accounting is finished. Your freedom does not begin when someone else finally sees what they did. It begins the moment you decide that you have paid enough, that you have understood enough on behalf of people who were not yet ready to understand themselves, that the extraordinary capacity you carry, to see, to feel, to hold the full weight of another person's truth, belongs to you now, not to the relationships that consumed it, not to the people who learned to rely on it without returning it, to you, completely, finally. And what you do with it from here, who you offer it to, how you protect it, what you ask for in return, that is not selfishness, that is sovereignty, and it begins now.